pleasure to introduce our next session today. It's a very important topic to all of us. Most of the organizations here are nonprofits, and fundraising is a primary funding source for all of us. So this topic is development and revenue streams in automobile museums. We are very lucky to have one of our own, Karen McClaflin, who has the CFRE designation, which means she is quite the expert in fundraising. She has served as the executive director of the ALS Association and the California Automobile Museum before coming back now a year ago for her second term at the California Automobile Museum. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Karen.
All right. Oh, I'm on. Well, thanks. That was a great first session. I hope I can do something similar. I know development isn't always our favorite topic to talk about, but it is truly something we must do, and we must do well if we want to have all the programs and nice things that we want to have, right? So yes, I served 9 years at the California Auto Museum from 2006 to 2015. Took a break to specifically do development, first in a consortium of 5 nonprofits that primarily served in the homelessness area, and then for Broadway Sacramento for several years, raising money, and that was about a $25 million organization. So yes, and I have my CFRE, which is kind of like a PhD, but not at all. So it stands for Certified Fundraising Executive, and so that is kind of my focus, even as the executive director now back at the California Auto Museum. And we all know that since COVID, the landscape has changed, fundraising has changed, development has changed. So we need to focus our efforts a little more strategically and differently since pandemic, evaluating a little more maybe our return on investment on some things. Maybe we've struggled, as everyone has, with staffing issues, definitely, with donors being protective of their assets and things. So sometimes we need to retire outmoded techniques, and we need to try new things. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So yeah, it's not always exciting as talking about how we spend our money and our exhibits and things, but something we really need to focus on, especially for those of us who are nonprofits, but even the for-profits. You may need to have fundraisers to supplement that income. So traditional income that we all depend on, things like admissions and memberships, those are pretty standard for museums. But as we look at our current revenue streams, maybe looking at how do we want to improve that? How do we want to enhance those with new ideas? Diversity, keeping diversity in mind, and looking at maybe some new ways. So we'll talk about that, talking first about improving and enhancing our current revenue streams. So obviously, donations. We rely on donations from individuals, and I'm going to come back to this because I just truly believe it's much easier to ask for money than to try to raise money. So we're going to focus on that after we talk about some other things that we need to do. So yes, I believe it's far easier to ask. So you need to be sure that you're having, a couple of campaigns a year, most times maybe a summer campaign and a year-end campaign that might kick off with Giving Tuesday. And what we have recently done, because this was a big deal when I worked at Broadway, Sacramento, we had donor levels. So all of us probably have membership levels that have different benefits, but have you considered higher level donation levels that have corresponding benefits? So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just to reach those, I'm sure we get those bigger donations, but are we sufficiently acknowledging and rewarding your high-level donors? So, who are your major donors? Are you stewarding them? Are you giving them special treatment so that you can cultivate that relationship into even higher levels? So direct asks are important, and we'll go into that a little more, as well as Corporate matches. If you don't have, for example, we have Intel headquarters in Sacramento, and so we have many of their retirees and current employees, so we get a couple $1,000s from their volunteering as well as their donations. So look into corporate matches as well. Pretty standard rental events. Often we do rental events, but maybe consider getting more creative, making sure that there are areas of your museum, not just your rental area. Maybe you have an event in a special gallery, or maybe you have an event even in your children's area, if that is the audience that you might want to appeal to for that rental. And then, of course, fundraising events. We often have our cruises, our car shows, our galas, but consider putting a spin on that, making yourself different than all the other organizations in town that are, for instance, doing a gala. Maybe you incorporate, a speakeasy, a trivia night, casino night into that. And then sponsorships. We often, reach out to sponsors for our exhibits and for our events, but thinking a little more broadly, there may be some that really want to sponsor your educational programs, maybe one program, maybe the entire program, sponsoring specific exhibits or even individual cars in your museum. And then, of course, your family programming. So we heard a little bit about family programming in the first session, dancing with the cars, for instance. Think creatively about who in the community might be interested in sponsoring something like that. So a lot of times in our museums, we can get a little siloed. So, there's exhibits and curatorial, there's development, and there's education. But really, when you can cross-pollinate, it's much more advantageous to you. So, development department, and, for smaller staffs, this may be I'm development and executive director, so I get it. It's, you're wearing multiple hats, but coordinating with the education department. What is coming up? What are we doing programmatically that we can maybe reach out to new audiences and maybe incorporate sponsorships or some other revenue stream with that? All right, and let's talk a minute about new and potential revenue streams. If you don't already, you should consider a planned giving campaign. A lot of us have planned giving options. We may have a web page. We may respond to somebody saying, hey, I'm thinking about naming your museum in my estate plan. Can you send me some information? So those are reactive measures. But proactive, consider an actual campaign where you're meeting with people similar to a capital campaign. And you're talking to them. So you start with your volunteers, you start with your board members, you start with your current donors, you start with your volunteers. And you meet with them. It could be a group setting. Many have, they invite an estate attorney to come in. If you do that, and if you have already done that, you may know it's pretty dry. So something we did at Broadway is we incorporated like the names of Broadway musicals into all of the talking points. So we're working on that with cars. So when you talk about, the different avenues of planned giving, tie it in with a car. Make it fun, make it interesting. But even better is just that one-on-one or even small groups. I encourage, the larger workshop type where you invite somebody, you have some cocktails and some snacks. But when you can really meet with people one-on-one, it is much more effective. Consider day trips to some private collections. They don't necessarily have to be near you. So we have an upcoming trip to San Francisco to see a private collection. We've rented a bus, we're charging $100 a head, and we're making $3,000 on that, taking a bus. So that's a simple little trip that you can plan, and it really ties into the mission of your organization. But we're also going to the Carolinas. So we have one of our board members coordinating this. He builds himself into the trip so that his trip is paid for. He's the coordinator, and he puts that together. So if we get our minimum 24, we build in $500 per person that goes to the museum. So we'll make about $13,000 with our minimum requirement. We are also going to Cuba this year, so you do have to have a travel agent to do that. But again, we've built into the trip a $500 donation to the museum so that we can make several $1,000s. Again, still goes to your mission. You plan car-centric trips, and it's providing entertainment. It is going towards stewardship. These are often going to be your, donors with a little more discretionary income that may go on this. It's an opportunity to really interact. So if you have a development director, or if your executive director or CEO does that, I would encourage them to go on these trips too. That's an excellent opportunity, to be sitting next to somebody on a bus or at dinner or wherever it might be, and to continue that cultivation. Maybe you want to offer rides in some of your cars. We have our cars insured by Hagerty, and we have a program where we take our cars out. We insure about a dozen of them to be able to take them out and provide rides, go to special events. We just, took a car to high school homecoming, it fit with their theme. So getting those cars out and charging for that is something that is one of our revenue streams as well. Some other potential new, maybe some of you do all this, so I'm mislabeling it, but I'm guessing a lot of these are new ideas, maybe for some. Maybe take a look back. If your museum has been in existence for 10 plus years, what's a revenue stream that used to exist and kind of died out, but maybe you can bring it back with a new focus, paying attention to diversity. How can you change that up, make it more relevant to your current membership and donor pool? Specialized tours. So if you've gone to Disneyland or Disney World, they charge a fortune for these special tours that they do. So can you get your board president? Can your CEO or your curator be available to do this? And really focus on these are some little known facts that the general public isn't privy to, or we're going to let you sit in this car and maybe even start it up, maybe even do a loop around the block. Maybe they get to bring some business associates, and for them it's an investment of morale or sales. Lots of opportunities for specialized tours. If you have your collection in another area, obviously that's a great an off-site storage. And then car sales. I just stole this page out of our annual report. These are some cars that we sold in 2023. We have a donation program, which you probably all have, but we also have a consignment program. So we have a person who's actually licensed as a dealer, and folks can consign their cars to the museum. We keep 10%, and there's an upfront charge of $500 for the listing and the hard costs associated with that. It raised 17% of our annual revenue was car sales. So it's a pretty significant revenue stream for us, if you may want to think about that. All right, and then always programs, events, activities that tie into your current exhibit. So rather than just a standalone, family programming event, maybe it's something that has to do with whatever you have on display at the time. So right now we have an exhibit, Rucas y Caruchas, which is ladies in low riding. So our exhibits our events and our programs have largely focused around that. And that is quite a large community for us. So it's been very popular, and just has been expressed in the past. It's bringing in an audience that maybe hasn't been to the museum before. So not only are they coming maybe for a movie night or a dance class, but it revolves around whatever that exhibit. So it really, obviously ties into that mission, but it gives them a double bang for their buck, right? So yeah, many of you are probably doing these, but the encouragement just to each time, we just had a paint and sip and they painted a lowrider car, one of those in our exhibit, for example. We have a marketing person who I've asked to consider teaching an AI art class because he does that very well, and that's a new technology, right, that many people haven't experimented much with. So we're going to do an AI art class. So yeah, here's just some examples. The date night idea, our California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco has a nightlife, is what they call it. And it just made like the #1 date spot in San Francisco was this, Academy of Sciences. Who would have guessed? But, that's something that I aspire to. I would love to be that in Sacramento. Their #1 date night spot. If you create, something with cocktails and music and activities that they can do, it's kind of a neutral ground that they can come and have a date. All right, so some things to remember. Always consider your return on investment, i.e. staff costs. So many times in our budget, what we'll see are the hard costs to various programs or fundraising events that we do. But if it is at all possible to incorporate your staff time, have them keep track. How much time is everybody spending on this? And really look at it at the end. Take a hard look. Is this a good return on investment? And we will do programs sometimes where we at least break even, maybe even lose money if it's educational, if we feel like it is serving our mission. But with my focus as development, I want it to break even or better. Now, the break even is often okay if you really believe that an event is bringing in those new folks who have never been to your museum before. So they end up on your mailing list. Maybe they'll come back with a friend because they saw a car or two or a display that they think somebody would like. You've just gained a potential donor for the future. So it can be an investment, but you really don't want it to be a burden on staff that's taking time away from the other things that they need to be doing. So look at that ROI factor pretty carefully. Stay true to your mission. So if you have a speaker series, make sure that it's focusing on something that relates to your mission. It's not necessarily just, oh, this big name is going to be in town, so let's have them at our museum. That can function well, but even better if it can tie into your mission. Definitely consider DEI and equity issues. We are, in a new time, and I think that that's important. I'm from California too, so we're a bunch of liberals out there, but you definitely want to think about that as you plan your events. And we just heard, how can things incorporate women and families and children more? Those are important things as well. Again, I'm going to say this probably 5 times in this presentation. It's much easier to ask for money than raise it. So if you are doing an event that really doesn't serve your mission that well, doesn't bring a whole lot of new audiences in, and takes a lot of staff time, scratch it. Say, you know what, we're making $1,000 on this event, we're making $500, we're only breaking even. We would do much better to focus our time on stewarding donors and asking them for money. So, and then looking at trends in giving. So put this quote over here by the founder of Habitat for Humanity. But some trends in giving, if we take a look at that, since 1982 to 1922, we do see a rise in foundational giving, but that's a bit deceiving because the reason for that is that more and more high-level donors are putting their money into donor-advised funds. And so those are considered foundations. They then make a request, I want, $5,000 to go to the California Auto Museum. That's a grant. So the terminology is a little bit deceiving. That really still incorporates individual giving at the highest level. So even though here in 2022 you see individual giving as 64%, it's actually higher to 85% once you factor in the individual giving that is within those other areas. So focusing on grants is great. Focusing on bequests is great. Corporate foundations, corporate sponsorships are great, but if you're not putting the majority of your efforts into individual giving, you're missing the boat. That's where the majority of the money is. And if you've ever been through a capital campaign, you can attest to this. My first capital campaign, I was amazed that I could sit in a room and ask a person for $100,000 and they would agree to that. But it is truly possible if you do it the right way. All right, so let's look at some development plan components. And I would encourage all of your museums to, if you don't already have a development plan, it is as important as your strategic plan. You need to know where you're going, what you're doing, who's doing it, and is it worth doing. So taking a look at some of that, just as with a capital campaign, have a case statement. And this is much more general than a capital campaign. A capital campaign is, we're raising money for this building, and this is what we're going to do with this building. But a case statement for your museum can be as simple as your mission statement, but elaborate. What are some expansions that we want to do in the coming years that flow with our mission statement? So we're reaching out in this way. We'd like to attract more women, more families, more children. Elaborate on your mission statement, and that becomes a case statement for you. Look at your annual budget over a 3-year period. So granted, this is guesswork for a lot of us. It's projection. But if you can, and maybe a simple rule of thumb is, next year we'd like a 10% increase. So where would that be? Is that going to be an individual giving? Are we hiring a grant writer and we're going to look at more grants? Are we hiring a development director who's going to focus on both individual and corporate giving? Where's that money coming from? And what are our goals for spending it? What programs are we wanting to add? And again, we're not talking about a capital campaign where we're saying we want to build on another wing to our museum. These are programs. These are what is the museum offering to the community. Looking at financial goals for each area of fundraising. So if you identify some areas of fundraising, maybe what we've talked about today, maybe something more specific to your museum. What are those areas and what are our goals? Again, guesswork, projection, yes, but without putting those goals, it's going to be tough to talk to somebody about where you're going and how they can help. So attach some money amounts and some goals being not only the money, but how many more people do we want to see involved in our programs? What's the demographics of those programs? Things that you think will appeal to your members and donors. List of all the activities that are going to take place. Again, you're not going to know all this, and it may change next week, but it's important to go into some of these conversations with donors with a list of, here's what we want to do to not only get to our goals, but to expand our mission in the community. And what are the communication activities around this? So it's going to need to involve your marketing department. Again, not being siloed, but really working together. You may want to have, all team meetings when you're talking about this stuff so that everybody can be involved. We've got an educational component. We've got a marketing component. That is all important in development. It's not a standalone operation. Your plan for acknowledgement and stewardship. So again, this could go back to donor levels that you may have, and what benefits go with that. Do you have a donor wall? Maybe there is one for a capital campaign you've done in the past, but do you have your annual donors listed? And do you want a special one that's maybe in your classroom, your conference room? Who helped fund that? You can do that for more than just capital campaigns. A detailed timeline. So over the next 3 years, here's what we want to do and when. And this is probably more important for you internally than for the donors externally. You can't bite off the whole cookie in one chomp. You need to piece this out. So the first year, we're going to do this, and then we're going to build on it and do this the second year. And then by the third year, we're hoping to launch this program or that. So make it manageable. Budget and staffing. Do you even currently have the staffing to pull this off? Don't try to do too much, because then your core programs, your core operations could suffer. So, maybe in the second year, your plan is to hire a part-time assistant to help with development. Maybe the marketing department needs. So looking at budgeting and staffing, how much money is that going to take to do that? When is the point where we will have raised enough money to be able to hire additional staff to help with this? So a long-term plan. And then, of course, consider your volunteer support. Definitely, as a nonprofit organization, look to volunteers. Many of these volunteers have retired from jobs in the corporate sector, maybe education. Put that call out. Where can you use volunteer support on your planning committees, on your execution, meeting with folks? Everybody has connections. How can you tap into your volunteer pool for some of that and not have to rely entirely on staff and beefing up staff to accomplish things? All right, that's a lot, but I tend to try to remember it with the acronym CAFLCPDB. So remember that as you're developing your development plan. So let's start off with just stewarding our donors. How are we acknowledging them? Obviously, we've all heard it. Definitely thank them. But more specifically, are you changing your letter, your thank you letter that you send out? Or is it the same template for 5 years in a row? Maybe there needs to be a different template for your ongoing donors, those who are donating monthly or quarterly, or long-term donors. Use different templates, customize, segment, do all those things. If you can acknowledge within 48 hours, that's ideal. And we'll talk about some different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be written, but if 48 hours is not doable, then I would say shoot for a week. Try not to make it longer than a week, if at all possible. So, and this doesn't necessarily have to be a development person. I don't send the thank you letters in our organization. Our front desk person does that. That's one of their responsibilities. So how can you divide up? Maybe even use a volunteer to help with that. Phone calls for acknowledgement. If you look at this chart, when you get a first-time donor or a large donor, I would recommend phone calls. And again, this does not have to be always your executive director or your development director. Ask some board members if they would make some acknowledgement calls, especially if there may be people they know. Can you call these 3 people? Make it manageable, or the list may just languish and never get done. So make it manageable and ask for others to be involved. But obviously, the retention rate with no phone calls, still an impressive 33%. But with a phone call, especially more than one phone call, it definitely goes up exponentially. And texting is now a thing. 98% open rate on texting. So if you have cell phones, and don't make it a book, a quick thank you from, the executive director or the development person, a board member, that will get noticed, as opposed to a letter or a phone call that may not. Definitely texting, and of course social media. So like this is a little meme over here that you're seeing repeat. Put that up on your social media and then list some of your donors that have donated in the last week. Do that once a week, or do that, for $5,000 and up, or, have whatever works for your museum. Have a plan for that and involve, again, your marketing department, especially with the social media. All right, so let's talk about some donor levels and benefits. If you haven't considered this, here are some potential benefits that you can offer. And oftentimes we have these as programs, so maybe you have a speaker meet and greet. Well, maybe you want to change that over and make that a benefit for your donors. It can be all your donors, depends on your donor pool. It can be all your donors, it can be some of them. If you don't have really high cost to some of these, maybe consider, making them just a benefit for donors. Now, again, you have to look back at the equity issues. There are some things that you want to make sure are very inclusive and not, they don't cost a lot. But if you can do some exclusive things for your donors, that's high value as well. So, here's just some examples that you may want to do. I threw in gift baskets because I don't know about your museum, but we often just get some random donations, right? And I'm not talking about, an old rusty car part. I'm talking about maybe from a business, they want to give you 25 of this item from their stores, or, that they, what are we going to do with this? We can't use this for a big event. There's not enough. But, could you start putting together some gift baskets with some of this, higher end swag, let's call it, and maybe just, deliver that to a donor to say thank you. Worth a try. We don't do this right now, but it's on my hit list. All right, some tools for success. You definitely need a database. If you're using Excel, if you're using QuickBooks, if you're using something that's not specifically made to be a CRM database, and that's, you're able to go into a CRM database and put things like, last time I talked to the donor, they were sending their daughter away to Harvard, so they might have to, cut back on their donations for a minute. Those are things you want to remember so that the next time you see them, how's your daughter doing at Harvard? You're going to review those notes. You can't do that in an Excel spreadsheet or through QuickBooks. So you need a database. So here's a list, and it kind of, like Tessitura is the Duesenberg of donor databases. Well, probably Salesforce, but not the nonprofit version. Don't bite off more than you can chew. One, some of these are tens of thousands of dollars. So, if you are the Henry Ford, maybe you want to do that. But if you're everybody else, you may want to look at some of these others. We actually use Past Perfect, and we're planning to upgrade to the web version, which I think is going to help immensely, but it functions as an object database as well as a donor database. It's not the best one out there, but it's what we can manage right now, and it allows for some of this relational information to go into it, as well as just detailed information. So again, in QuickBooks, you're not necessarily able to add a spouse name or what kind of cars they own. You're not going to be able to put any of that information. So you need a spot that's accessible to everybody. The executive director or the development director shouldn't be the only ones stewarding these donors. You let your board know. And if you're going to be going out with somebody, let me look them up in our database and give you some information about where they're at in their donor history, where they're at in their support to the museum. So check these out, see what you can do. You may have another one, and we can share that at the end if you have one that you really love. You need to practice how to ask with your staff, and with your board members. So this may need, you may need to ask, can I have 15 minutes at the next board meeting to talk about how to ask? And this happens, again, if you've been through a capital campaign, you have this whole training, right? And as an aside, if you are thinking about a capital campaign, I would never recommend doing it on your own. Get a consultant, pay the money, get trained, do it right. You don't have to keep that consultant on for the entirety of your campaign, but they're worth their money in gold at the beginning to just train you to do this. And if you've experienced a capital campaign, I think you'll agree, unless you had a dud. But yeah, we had a consultant, we kept them on for 6 months, and then we went on our own for the rest of the campaign. And it was a good investment. So in a way, this development plan is a mini capital campaign. So without hiring a consultant, you'll want to talk to them about how to make the ask. You bring that up and people are biting their fingernails and nope, that's not something I want to do. But just talking about the ease of it, maybe set up, a sample scenario of how easy it is. Now, I love it. I consider myself a Cupid, is what I say, is if I'm talking to a donor and we've got the museum here, I'm making a match. And, sometimes it's not a match. Sometimes they swipe left. But sometimes, they fall in love with the museum and it's a long-term relationship. So looking at it that way rather than just asking for money. There are people with discretionary income with large amounts of money that they want to give away, whether it's for tax purposes or philanthropy reasons, and you're making a match. You're connecting them with your museum, which may pull at their heartstrings. So it's a little harder with a car museum than, say, ALS, but it can be done. So you talk about how to make that ask. Definitely board and CEO involvement. There are donors who, they just want to know that somebody important to the organization is in the room when you're making the ask. And so recruit. It shouldn't be the same people making the ask over and over. Now, maybe the literal one where the words come out, would you consider a gift of, can be one person, somebody who feels comfortable with that. But you need to have people in the room who know that donor, who have a relationship, who are comfortable talking about the museum. So consider those things carefully and involve those people in your development plan. And then it's important for your museum, to define what is a major gift, what is a major donor, because you're going to be treating them a little bit different. And, you have to be careful with that. But the fact of the matter is, they've got money you need. So you need to have a different plan for your major donors than maybe for your donors. Our level is 5,000. So those who are 5,000 and up, they're on our wish list, and those below we're not ignoring, but it's just a different plan. So consider that and the segmentation there. All right, let's talk about the development cycle. So here is a potential donor. Maybe they come to the museum for the first time. They're at the very beginning level. I'm not going to say bottom, it's the beginning level. Everybody's a potential donor. So they're at the beginning level. If they buy a membership, they've just gone up a level. If they come to one of your programs, especially something, with maybe a little bit higher ticket price, like a gala or, Concours event or something where there's a little bit higher level of involvement, there's a stair step. They make that first investment, or they make that first donation. They just went, to a different level. And then you've got your major donors who are giving. Maybe you have some who are giving every year. or quarterly, and it's significant. Maybe you have donors who are giving, gifts of stocks. There's different levels. So you're identifying your donors. And again, your donor database is going to keep track of these levels. Don't try to do it in a spreadsheet. There's too much information. There's too much nuance that you want to keep track of. And then you're going to go to cultivation. So make a plan. How are we cultivating these folks? You don't necessarily need a plan for, the people who are coming to your museum, excuse me, for the first time or occasionally, but have a plan for your donors or your members. What are we going to do special for our members? Are we going to have some members-only events? And are we going to talk about ways to donate, ways to support the museum? Cultivating somebody at a higher level, familiar with your museum, maybe they're a board member, that's going to be a different plan. So taking a look at that cultivation process and where people are on that spectrum. And then solicitation. So solicitation, as it says, that's an actual request, but it may not be for money the first time. It might be a request to help us with a program. Can you come and be involved in this focus group? We want to expand, improve this program, and we'd like your input. All of that is part of the solicitation plan, going back to cultivation, and you're going to jump back and forth. But the ask, it's not necessarily always monetary. It may be for some kind of involvement that pulls them in deeper. And then stewardship. Once they are donating, how are you stewarding? So that goes back to how are you acknowledging them? Finding out what their interests are. Are they into Model Ts or are they into electric vehicles? What areas can you involve them in that speak to their interests? That shows I'm paying attention. I'm aware of your interest, your areas of involvement, and cultivating them from there. So that's where stewardship comes in. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but ideally, you make some lists. Who are our members that we can maybe start cultivating and stewarding through this process. And just, again, like in a capital campaign, you can rate them. So what is their financial capacity? Is it a 1? They really don't have a lot of discretionary funds, or is it a 5? They've got a whole lot of money. What's the level of engagement? And this can be current engagement in the museum, or it can also be a relational. My next door neighbor loves cars. He owns 3, but he's not involved in the museum. But my relationship with him is pretty strong. So I'm going to put him at a 4. Even though he's not involved in the museum, he's involved with me. And people give to people. So, if I rate his financial capacity at, say, a 3 and his engagement at a 4, he's going to come in at our second highest level on our list. Warnings. Do not get stuck here in they have a whole bunch of money, but they have nothing to do with our museum and nobody knows them. It's not going to work. It's saying, will you marry me, without even knowing somebody. So you have to start somewhere, but I would not focus there. And oftentimes we do. So say, Jay Leno, he's got a gob of money, he's into cars, let's go after him for some money. Well, I'm sorry, if nobody knows him and he doesn't know about your museum, just put him in the background. That's not going to work. So this kind of gives you an idea of where to start with each level. And so these lists are important. How are you rating them? And I know what you're all thinking. This is exactly what I'm going to do when I get back to my museum. This sounds so easy. That's what you're all thinking, right? No. I know. It's a lot of work. But you have to start somewhere. So if you don't have a plan, if you're leaving things up to circumstance or haphazard, daily life, you're probably just doing whatever's right in front of you. You're not getting that bigger picture. You're not making a plan to move forward. So this is a tool in the plan, but I don't want it to be overwhelming. All right, so with this list, this could be what it looks like. You have your donors' names, who knows them the best, and if that's nobody, then that may fall to your CEO or a board member or somebody to reach out. Who is the volunteer lead? That's a great option. Ask your volunteers, who do they know? Who might we approach? And do you have a volunteer lead there? What phase are they in? What's the request that we're going to make when we sit down with them? These are too high, I will tell you right now. This is more, capital campaign asks. You may want to start with $500. Would you consider making an investment? When do you think? And this is really important. When are you going to sit down and do this? Because again, we know we wear many hats in our museums and we get sidetracked and we're just putting out fires all day long sometimes. So without a plan, without a date, and we're checking this, when are we going to do this? Who's going to call them? It's going to fall to the wayside. It's not going to happen if you don't have a plan. So, and then specifically, what is your next step? So obviously this is an evolving list. You're changing this as you go on. Maybe you thought you would ask for $5,000, but as it turns out, no, I think we're going to bump them up to 10 because we found this piece of information out. Or we're going to lower that because we just discovered they've got 3 kids in college and it's probably not the best time to ask for a large gift. But we're cultivating this. We're going to start with a small ask and later make a bigger ask. All right, so again, take what you can from this. It was a quick overview because obviously we can't get too deep into all the techniques and plans that we all have. But I'm hoping that maybe we could take some time, if you have something you've done that's been successful, if you've done something that's been unsuccessful, or if you have any questions, maybe we can take some time to just kind of be interactive. So what do you think? What are you doing? What's working? Yeah. So I'll start. Yes, your big events are a lot of work. They're very taxing for your staff. Don't dismiss them necessarily, though, because that's how you can move a person from just a visitor or maybe a member to the next level. They come to that event, maybe they make a donation in your fund a need or buy a high-level auction item. You've just identified somebody that now you know has capacity. So those are important, but I would just caution against making them your main strategy for fundraising. They should be a tool. Your big events, they may make a whole bunch of money, but they're also really time consuming and, can just wipe out your staff for a period of time. Gauge them carefully. Yes. Yeah. Honestly, people are coming to silent auctions to get a deal. Live auction is where the money is, plus you incorporate your fund a need or a bid for a cause or whatever you may call it. Silent auctions are fun for the participants. They love looking at those tables and all the goodies and putting their name down, but you're not going to make very much money. I think for our gala, overall, our silent auction probably raises less than 10% of the take-home revenue. Any other thoughts on that? All right, thanks for the question. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'll share. Thinking of outside the box and something that we have just done at Savoy that isn't even on display yet in essence. Show of hands, how many people here, like just in the museum, has just a general like donation box that you have sitting out somewhere? Okay, awesome. So do we. So since we opened, I went back and looked at how much we got each year. First year, we'll use a round number. Say it was $1,000 it generated just from people walking in and dropping in some change. And so just recently, I went to a local banking institution. So here's an idea to share. And said, hey, we've raised this much 2 years ago, this much last year. Would you partner with us on our donation box and do a match? So if somebody gives $10, the bank's going to match it at the end of the year in essence. And so it was a very easy proposal and opportunity to share that with them. They jumped all on it, so it's kind of a one-for-one match. If somebody comes in and visits and drops in a couple of bucks, the bank is going to provide a check basically at the end of the year in order to double that donation in essence. Sometimes it might be set at a certain limit or whatever. So we've got the agreement, we did that, and now we're in the design phase just to kind of give the donation box a new branding aspect.
That's what I was just going to ask. Yeah, you need to market that.
And so that was something that was kind of one of those low-lying fruit things where it's like, well, we have this, how can we maximize its opportunity?
It's a great idea.
So that's one that we're doing now.
Yeah, and that comment kind of reminded me too. I know I had up here, teach how to make an ask. And, I don't have time to go into that, but I will touch on, instead of will you donate or, just something with a $5,000 donation, we can do this is a much better way of saying it. It's kind of like those I statements instead of you statements. With a donation of this, we can do this, is a much gentler ask and something that you can work easier into a conversation than will you give. You're talking about your museum, you're talking about all the things we do. We need to raise $50,000. So with a donation of 10, we can start the process by doing this, or we can enhance. So look at things like that, and those are the kinds of things that you're talking to your board and talking to your staff about. Saw some hands, yeah.
I was going to say, one, it doesn't create tons of money, but a couple $1,000 we have in the budget, but round up donations. Most of you have a general computerized software system for your email, et cetera. They kind of have built in on the back end already a way you can round up. So if you're buying a couple things, buying an admission ticket, and round up 50 cents, it adds up.
Yep. Yeah.
So we talked about galas and events as a tool, and then some of the people that we work with in our superiors think of them if there's a dollar sign when people walk out the door. How do you change them over, and do you have some sort of like little recipe in your head for how to make a gala successful?
I think doing the exercise of your return on investment. And if you've built your gala up, that it makes you $1 million, keep doing it. But if you're at that stage where, it's making us $100,000, but our expenses are, 60%, and then we have these staff costs. I asked my staff to keep track of their hours as we went into this event, and turns out, our staff costs are extraordinary. Here's the value of that when I multiplied it out, by our hourly or salary wages. And yeah, in the end, we're only making about $10,000 on that. Right. So maybe it's still worth it if you're making $10,000 and you're bringing in those new audiences. But I think it's a shift in thinking. and I do get tired of hearing friend raiser. It's a friend raiser. You know what? I need the money. So, it really needs to have a good return on investment. So it can't necessarily, a high intensity work event cannot just be a friend raiser. It needs to be bringing in an amount of money that's significant for your organization with the benefit of bringing in new audiences. I wouldn't necessarily say that's what your smaller programmatic events are for, is bringing in those new audiences and stewarding current folks to the next, getting them more involved. That shouldn't be what your big fundraising event is about entirely. That should be a perk.
Getting back to the silent auction, we're probably in a little bit different area, but our silent auction actually raises a huge amount of money compared to our galas or others.
Wow.
We're very focused on specific mark. In our case, it's Rolls Royce and Bentley. So those people, number one, are rabbit collectors, and number two, are fiercely competitive. And when you put up those specific items that they wanted to add to their collection, I can say that they are pleased to outbid their friends.
Right.
Just to rub it in their nose.
Right. So that's a great example. Yes, if you have it dialed in and you have donors who are giving you those silent auction items that are of high value emotionally or monetarily to your donors, do it. But if you're out there scrambling and asking, local vendors and businesses who are already struggling to, make a donation to you, that may not be the best use of your time. Yeah. There really is no magic bullet that I can give you. Again, I think, doing that return on investment exercise and really figure out, are you increasing? Was this the first year ROI and the second year was a little better, the third year a little better, or are you pretty flatlined? If you're flatlined, you may want to consider doing some different things. And not to say we're going to cut this out. Talk about some variations. Can you add a component? Maybe you don't have a guest speaker that's costing you $20,000. Maybe you do a casino night. Maybe you do a speakeasy theme. Maybe you do something different. Maybe you take it into smaller groups. You can, if you have donors with, fancy houses and plenty of room, maybe you do smaller home events, salons, make them fancy, but chunk it out a little more so that they're not so intense in their work. And with smaller groups, you can make those personal asks so much more effective. With a gala, it's, shotgun experience. And so you're hoping you have, a few that raise their paddles at those high levels, but it's not building relationships necessarily. So look at some other options and maybe say, next year, what if we try this? Or, have a brainstorming session. What could we do to really improve our bottom line on this? Maybe it's, can we move to heavy appetizers instead of a sit-down dinner? Can we get some of that donated? Again, you still have to take into consideration that's more work. So where are our strongest assets? Do we have volunteers that can help with that? In which case, maybe we go this direction. If it's all staff-based and we are worn out, no, we can't increase our work. Good. Yeah.
We had something kind of fun during COVID. We had a phantom ball for 2 years and just advertised
Does that work?
Came in, didn't cost us anything, it was a great fundraiser. Yeah. Even the cars, giving rides and bidding cars, that's a real big thing.
Great. Can I dig a little deeper? What did you make on your Phantom events?
Well, we're a small,
Yeah.
but we made about 8% of our.
Wow. Okay. That's worth it. Yeah, that's worth it. All that. Nope. Yeah, I mean, you all know if you do those big events, they are a lot of work. And you do have to ask the question that was over here, could our time have been spent better in another way? I think that's a really important question that should be more than just throw out there. Let's talk about this. How could we reinvest the time? If I spend 80 hours on this event, what could I do differently with my 80 hours that might result in more revenue and stronger relationships? I saw a hand, yeah. Right? Yeah, I think that does often have a short shelf life. It worked during COVID because we had no choice. And, residually, you can continue to do some types of events like that. But I think we're getting to the point where, no, folks want to get out and do things. And again, with a Phantom event, what you're missing is FaceTime. What you're missing is that, individual exposure to potential donors. They're just watching on a screen, and it's not quite, the stewardship component. Yeah. Sure. So we have what we call Sunday drives. It's third Sunday of every month. It's actually free with admission. And we have a road crew, so we take our road crew cars out and we just drive up and down Front Street, which is where we're located. It's not a, around the country tour. It's, they go for a 5-minute ride, and that's just a little taste of it. But then when we have our events or we have our auctions or, we want to do something a little more special, there's a price tag to those. So, here's our 12 cars that we take out, and then we have road crew members who also have some cars that they have offered to use to do that as well. Make sure your insurance, is fully aware and you're covered to do this. But, you can auction those, you can have those at, whether it's a big gala, an online experience, a smaller salon, in-home gathering. You can have some of these things available that folks can do. You have to realize that your membership or your donor pool is comprised of all different kinds of folks. Some may be filthy rich, but tight as a button, like you're not getting any of my money. If I'm going to give you some money, I want something in return. So that can be a good way to engage them. If there's a particular car that they may want a ride in, or they buy it for, son, daughter, grandchild, that can be something that will engage them. I can't say it makes us a high amount of money, but it appeals to a certain sector of our donors and members. Yes. Yeah, we use specific cars for that, and those are on our website. You can also rent those for your events. So, it might be $500 or $1,000, and one of our road crew members will bring that car to your event. And so we have parameters, we don't go too far with them. We don't go in the rain, it's pretty dialed in, what we will allow. And it's different for every car. And then, like I said, we have some private cars, folks who are willing to do that. When you use a private car, it's 100% profit, so somebody's paying $1,000 for this beautiful Rolls Royce to pull up to their wedding and use as a photo op. People don't drive them. Like, you don't get to drive one of our cars. Only our road crew who is trained and they're on the insurance drives it. But we may take it to an event as a photo op and make $1,000. The nice thing about it is, again, these are folks at maybe these events that have never stepped foot in the museum. So we're taking our cars to them instead of trying to get them into the building. So they learn about us, they see this beautiful car, what else do they have? But it also goes to your mission. It, spreads the love about the car hobby and the love of automobiles. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So think about what assets your particular city or town has. They've got the ocean. They've got, some architecture maybe in certain areas. You probably have something similar. We have a fabulous area of our city that does Christmas lights. Like, they shut the neighborhood down, you can only walk through. So, we take a chauffeur. Anyway, you get the picture. Think about what your town might have that, they don't get to enjoy necessarily unless they rent a limo or, fill that niche.
What cars of what era seem to be most popular for rides?
Well, we have a Willis Jeep painted pink. It's the Gala Surrey Jeep. Right now, that is the most popular. I don't know why. No, the license plate also says Barbie, so that helps. So things may change, right? Things may trend, but I would say the most popular are probably convertibles, especially if you have conducive weather, where you can take the cars out and put the top down. People love that, especially if they don't have convertibles. Or fancy, the fancy cars that are the beautiful. We use we have a Ford Fairlane, we have a Camaro, we have a Model A. So, ideally something from different eras that will appeal to whatever they like. But yeah, in general, whatever's trending, and then convertibles tend to be our most requested. Anything else? All right, been a fabulous audience. I'm available if you have any other thoughts or questions, but appreciate your time.